So perfect. Deadline chains and task flow are two ways in Filevine that you can keep track of important due dates, get reminders on those due dates, but then also create a series of automated tasks that may tie into those. You can use them together, you can use them completely separately, but either way, they're both really powerful built-in features with Filevine. In this specific example, I want to show how to use them together. The deadline chain I'm going to create is for discovery being served on the plaintiff. In this case, Fox Mulder is having discovery served on him. And then we'll also create a task flow that can point back to that deadline chain. A question I get asked quite a lot is, can we assign tasks from the deadline chain? And the answer is no, but you do have the ability to pull in or reference some of those deadline chain dates into a task flow using field replacement codes, like in DocGen. So a little bit all over there, but we will go ahead and open up our advanced menu. And anytime I'm working in the advanced menu or customs editor, I like to just duplicate my tab and have a project open on the front end so that I can come to advanced and take a look at things in the back end without having to navigate away from either page. So here I will come down to the deadline chain section, choose my org, and I'll just create a new, we'll call this discovery served on plaintiff. This will just be a test chain. We'll hit save. And when you start creating a deadline chain, it will default to being unpublished. So it's hidden. You won't be able to see it in any projects until you publish it by clicking this eyeball icon here. The first deadline I'm going to add isn't really a deadline. It's that initial date we're using to calculate all of the other deadlines from. So this will be the discovery served on plaintiff. I'm putting complete in parentheses so that when a user goes in to activate this chain, that gives a little indicator. Go ahead and mark this one as complete. We're not giving it a due date. This is just the date we're going to use as our calculator. So I'll hit save here. And with this one as well, I'm going to hide it in the calendar, and I'm not assigning a reminder schedule because we do not need to be reminded of this. We're just entering this to get our chain started. This first actual deadline is going to be discovery response due. That's going to be dependent on discovery served being complete, which we kind of have a little helper there. And we'll just go ahead and set this to a default 30 days later. This one, we do have the option to assign a reminder schedule. Maybe we want to do, we have a discovery reminder schedule that we've created. After I build this out and build the task flow, I can quickly show you where you can go to edit those reminder schedules if you need to, because when you're working with a deadline chain, you have the ability to assign a specific reminder schedule to a specific deadline if needed, or just assign the org default to everything. But sometimes firms haven't gone in and maybe customized the default, so you might have more reminders than you really need. So we can take a look at that in just a bit. But we'll create this first discovery responses due deadline. That's going to be our most important. And maybe we want some reminders for the team that once discovery served on plaintiff is complete, let's say 5 days later, oops. Maybe we want to provide a copy to the client. And I don't want to assign a specific reminder schedule to this one. Maybe we also want to submit our draft responses for approval no later than 10 days before that due date. So we've got just a few deadlines here. Our discovery is being served. We're going to calculate that 30-day out due date, but then we're also going to give our team a few reminders. So these aren't technically tasks, but we can reference back to them in a task just to let us know we should get that discovery out to the client maybe 5 days after we get it. And if we're having our discovery responses approved, let's aim to have that done 10 days before it's due. This, of course, may be ambitious, but you can customize those dates. So I have my test deadline chain here. I'm going to go ahead and publish that. And we can take a look at that really quickly in the project itself. I will come down to deadline chains. I'll click add a chain and choose that discovery served on plaintiff chain. So if today discovery was served, I would just mark this as complete. And then my other deadlines have calculated. So the 23rd is when those initial responses are due, but we want to aim to maybe have these out to the client by next Monday, just so that they can see what's going on. And when we mark that complete, or excuse me, actually, I'm missing one. Submit draft responses. Quick little tip there, double check if you want something to be earlier. Make sure you're also changing this so that for those deadlines we are calculating, we're going to use the due date to calculate other deadlines. We are not going to use the complete date. So I'll restart that in a moment. One thing I think would be good to show in the task flow, let's make this a phase-based task flow. So with task flow, you have two options, and I can talk about button options a little bit more. First, I'm going to do a phase-based task flow because the idea here is we have our discovery deadline chain, and maybe we have a discovery phase. When the case moves into discovery, we can have a task flow pop up letting us know what we need to do with that discovery option. I'll just go ahead and create a discovery phase here, and we can do that later. All right, so in my discovery phase, the first task I will add is activate discovery served on plaintiff deadline chain. And I'm putting this in brackets because that will allow me to convert this to a hyperlink. So a lot going on in this one section. I'm creating a new task flow just by clicking add an auto task, but I can use some of Filevine's modifiers to make that text appear differently. And we can share a link in the chat of those modifiers. I'll pull them up on the help center here in just a moment. But I can take this link for the deadline chain section and paste that in the open parentheses right behind my brackets. I'll just replace this project ID with that docgen code or field replacement code. So I have my first task, activate, open bracket, discovery served on plaintiff deadline chain. So I'm telling them what chain to look for, closing that bracket off, and then just attaching a hyperlink so that when this task populates, it's clickable. It will take them over to the deadline chain section. And I want this task to populate when the phase changes. I'm going to keep this set to the defaults of 0. So maybe we're changing the phase as soon as discovery has been served, and we'll activate that chain then. I just saw a question come through about explaining deadline groups in the deadline chains. Honestly, I have not utilized deadline groups. Jasmine, do you have any experience with utilizing deadline chain groups?
I haven't used them a ton, but my understanding is that essentially you can add in multiple deadlines and say, okay, at least one of these needs to be satisfied in order for the next deadline to populate.
I hope that that helps. Okay. All right, so we have our task here. Activate this discovery served on plaintiff deadline chain. I don't want to overwhelm too much, but as we build these out, we could point back to chain due dates. So maybe I could add a task that says serve discovery responses no later than, and let me actually just open up a new tab and I'll grab that code.
And I went ahead in the chat and put in kind of the description that Filevine gives for deadline groups. So yeah, it's like branching deadlines. Once you complete one of those from the group, the other deadlines will disappear. You only need to satisfy one of those. And then whatever you have dependent on that deadline will then populate from there.
And I'll grab this. So let's say, oh, gotta let that load for a moment. So while this is loading, what I'm doing here is I'm opening up the field list for my discovery section. It really doesn't matter what section you choose if you're pulling in deadline chain dates. They will populate in the field list. I'll give that some time to think though. My internet has been slow today. So the idea here is that I would put in the chain date as a field code. And of course, this task, we can set it due for 30 days, but this chain date would give an extra reminder, pulling from that deadline chain, that calculated due date, serve the discovery responses no later than this date when the discovery served on plaintiff task flow is complete. So the idea with making it contingent on this initial task we've created is that the discovery served on plaintiff chain will be activated when you change the phase. And then once you mark that task complete, you're already calculating 30 days out, so they should match up. Oh boy, really struggling here. All right, I'm just gonna scrap that one and we will just roll with what we have. I may also want to add a task after we've activated the chain to draft discovery responses. We can make that due 15 days later. And we'll submit responses for approval after we've drafted them. So that one can be due the same day. And when we're creating these tasks, we have a few options here. You can choose to have a task populate when another task is complete or when the phase changes. When the phase changes gives you the option to specify the create date as well. So you can choose to create a task immediately, but maybe you don't want it to be due for a few days. You can do that down here. I'm going to stick with when that draft discovery responses is complete. You also have the option to only continue this task flow if the phase doesn't change. So maybe you move into a phase and you have a task flow, but the remainder of that task flow is irrelevant because the phase has already changed. You could select this option so that those other tasks will not continue to populate. And then you have an option down here to choose a specific role to assign to. So if you wanted this to go to maybe the case manager, We could also notify the attorney. That's not assigning the task to both. That is giving the case manager the task, which is going to result in a feed notification and a task list notification. But when that task is assigned, the attorney would also get a feed notification showing that this case manager has received a task. So I've built out a little task flow here. We have our deadline chain. I'm going to go back into our project and move the phase to discovery. That first task should pop up with the hyperlink. Magic box of skills doing its thing here. And I can right click and open this in a new tab to go activate my deadline chain. I should be able to just open it from here too. Sorry, everyone. My internet is really struggling today. I'm just going to manually go to deadline chains. Grab our discovery served on plaintiff. I'll mark this one complete because that's how we have it set up. And then we have our other dates populating here. Our responses will be due the 23rd. We want to give a copy of this to the client by Monday. And then by the 13th, we want to make sure that we have approval on those final discovery responses to give us a little bit of time for edits before that discovery deadline. So these are going to give us notifications in the feed as those dates are approaching. We'll also see them on our project calendar. And then in our activity feed, as we continue marking these tasks complete, those other tasks will populate showing us that we need to go ahead and start drafting our responses, submit our discovery responses. Don't know why that one populated twice, but it is populating the correct due date that goes along with we activated that chain the same day that we're activating the task flow. Any questions there? If not, I want to take a quick look at reminder schedules. Okay, so with this deadline chain that we set up, each one of these deadlines has its own reminder schedule, and those are also set up back here in the advanced menu. Oops, wrong org. So when you are in your org and you're in the reminder schedule, you can see every reminder schedule you've created before, and then your org default will have that star by it. So in general, most firms, if you haven't gone through that customization process, you're probably using the Filevine default, which is a very extensive list of reminders. It'll start reminding you 180 days before, and then continue reminding you 180 days after if that task or that deadline is not marked as complete. You can create new reminder schedules by clicking the little plus symbol. And what that does is it kind of takes a shell of that Filevine default and allows you to remove what you don't need or add in additional. So maybe you want 365 days. You could add that one in here as before or after. And then you can also utilize just that on due date reminder. The pencil icon here will allow you to rename your reminder schedule. And then this little star icon will allow you to set that as the new default if you wanted to create a basic reminder schedule that you want to apply to all of your deadlines. So that is a quick blurb on the reminder schedules. In addition to reminder schedules and deadline chains working together, you also have roles and task flow working together. So if you are not using roles in your firm, or maybe you don't have task flow assigned to specific roles, you're just sticking with that default to the primary, you can set up roles for your team here in roles setup, and we'll just go back and choose our org. And this is where you can take a look at everything that already exists. You can add new ones, you can rename them, you can rearrange them, but having a list of roles set up for your team and assigning those to people on your team will be very helpful in maximizing what task flow can do. So instead of that just assigning to the primary, maybe the primary hasn't been reassigned to the actual person working the case, you would eliminate that potential that the task could get assigned to the wrong person and then potentially delayed or missed. So role setup right under reminder schedules, that's where you can create those if you wanted to build them out for your task flow. Any questions there? Okay. I know that was a kind of a brief walkthrough of both of those features. If there is a specific deadline chain you're working on building out or any specific task flow questions you may have, I am happy to take a look at that and maybe work through how we could make that work while we're here. Give another demonstration.
One other feature that ties into these deadline chains is that judicial calendar you see.
Perfect.
That allows you to essentially say, hey, these are the days that I want this deadline to count, so that it's not counting days that you're maybe not in office or that the courthouse is closed or whatever that looks like, so that you're not missing those deadlines or not showing up on weekends or anything like that. In this calendar section, you'll see the ones that are beige are the days that the calendar will not count. Those are weekends and usually US federal holidays. You can go in and manually add in additional days that you don't want it to count. So you'll see in January, all of the Fridays are blocked off. You can go in and add maybe you're off the entire last week of the year. And so you want to make sure that you're not getting deadline reminders or getting due dates during that time period. So you can always come in and click those off. You can create as many of these calendars as you need. So maybe each courthouse has a different set of rules for kind of filing. Maybe they never accept anything on Fridays. So you want to make sure that you get everything in before a Friday. You can go and rename the calendar. The one thing about the calendars is that you do have to do it each year. So 2025 will not retain the same dates that you put in as for 2024. The only ones that will transfer year to year, again, are US federal holidays and weekends. But you can, again, create as many of these calendars as you'd like. And then in those deadline chains, you're able to select and say, hey, for this specific deadline, I want it to count these days. For this deadline, I want it to use this calendar. Right now, it's at the default. You can have it count every day, or again, choose one of the ones that you made.
See, is there a way to use the judicial calendar for something other than reminders? I want to create a recipe for SOL dates. That should work. If you're creating an SOL deadline chain, you can use the new judicial calendar or a judicial calendar for that. In terms of a deadline field, let's take a look at the SOL field in case summary. I think it's just statute. So when you're looking at the deadline fields, unlike the deadline chains, you can't give it a specific calendar, but you can give it a specific reminder schedule. So that area where we were looking at setting up those reminders for different types of deadlines, if you do create an SOL reminder schedule, you can go into your SOL field in case summary and you can select that from your entire library of reminder schedules. You have the ability to customize that on a deadline basis, but it doesn't allow you to reference a calendar.
And if you saw when Amanda was in the deadline chains, you have the option to round to the day before when going those, excuse me. If you do choose not the default. it says round to prior day instead of next day.
Great questions. So I'll open up task flow again too, just so we can see them both. In your deadline chains, you can customize your calendar, how you're counting those days, customize how you're being reminded of them. And then in your task flows, you have the ability to customize who is receiving that task based on their role rather than the default of just the project primary. Sometimes if people aren't going in and reassigning the primary in the teams section or confirming that people in the team have the appropriate role, it may just default to the person who opened the case as the primary, and that might not be the appropriate person for the task. So it is a great idea to utilize roles in that task flow setup. And then also be sure that your team is going in and making sure everyone has the appropriate role assigned when you're in the case.
The only way for those deadline chains, you're going to get a reminder schedule. The only way you'll get that notification at the top, you'll see there's like two little teal dots. That indicates that you have new information in your tasks or feed. In order to get updates in your feed about upcoming deadlines, reminders, anything like that, you do have to be subscribed to the project in order to receive those in Filevine. You can also go into your individual settings and go through notifications and set up the ability for you to be notified when, you know, a deadline is coming up. They also have daily reminders where you can kind of get deadline reminders for projects that you're subscribed to in the evening. But again, you do have to be subscribed in order to get those updates. And then all of your task flows, whether they're from a button or from your phase changes, will show up in your activity feed. They'll also show up at that top there, and you'll see them in your feed. The ones you see in your feed are not necessarily ones that have been assigned to you. They may be just in the project, again, that you're subscribed to. To manage your feed a little bit better for items like deadline, reminders, and tasks, because you know, if you have 15 open projects and you're running deadline chains on all of those, you're going to start getting quite a few reminders. There is a little like file folder box just to the side that says got it. It's basically just saying, hey, I saw this, I don't need to see it again. You'll still all of the content in there will still be retained in the actual project, but it just won't be in your feed. Again, if you don't manage your feed, you could get thousands of items in there and then it becomes overwhelming and not really useful to you. So you do want to make sure that you go in, manage that, say, hey, I got it. Anything that you say got it to, again, will still show up in the actual project. Excuse me.
Yep.
In
the projects. And then you also have your recent tab. So if it's, you know, within the week or within a few weeks, you'll be able to see that in your recent as well, even though you've marked it as got it. Awesome.
And then again, all of your tasks show up in the feed, right next to the feed, and also in the activity of the project. You're able to see how it was kind of generated. If it just says posted by Filevine system, those are those automated task flows that Amanda went over that are based off of your phase changes. If it's via a button, it will let you know what button was triggered for that task. So you can always go back in, make any edits to maybe the section that task was clicked into, because that's a lot of the times, you know, why you would do a button over a phase change. And again, all of those show up there. Even if you do a manual task, they will also show up there. Excuse me.
All right. There have been great questions. Any other questions on deadline chains and task flow or Filevine while we're here?
One other thing to note about deadline chains, you can run multiple chains at the same time. So if you have, multiple discoveries that you need to maybe run on this person, you're able to add another deadline chain. You select the chain. If you are going to run the same chain, you will want to rename it. So the little sorry, the little pencil allows you to rename it. Whatever you kind of rename this to is what will show up on your calendar. So you want to make sure that you are able to differentiate between the two deadlines that you're running, again, especially if they're the same deadline chain. And then you're able to kind of toggle between the two. Right there where it says enter deadline chain, you'll see all of the chains that you've run. Again, you can add as many as you want and toggle between them. In that calendar for your individual project, you'll also see those dates listed. Perfect. And then you'll see in parentheses the name of the chain. So served on plaintiff 2 versus just the plaintiff one. So you can kind of rename it to be whatever you need it to again, to differentiate.
If you created a second chain or ran a second chain and you no longer need it, you can always go in and just remove the chain as well. And that will remove those from the calendar. You do have a few just limited filtering options here. You can choose to look at only outstanding deadlines as well. If maybe you have a very lengthy chain, it's very well built out. I've seen people create them for scheduling orders, and depending on the court, sometimes those can be quite long. So if you didn't want to see all open deadlines and completed deadlines, you could choose to use one of these filters here just to look at anything that's still upcoming or to look at everything that's been completed or off, which is your default. And then one other thing with the deadlines too that I did not mention, you can add notes and these will show up in the calendar when you look at that deadline. So I don't know, maybe I want them to know that these need to be mail and email. When I go into the calendar and I click on that deadline, I see my note in gray text here, just letting me know I need to send this by mail and email when I send it out. The notes for the deadline chains, though, they do not function like activity feed notes. They really are just text entry. There's no tasking or mentioning to be done there. But you can, if you're in the feed and there's new activity here on our discovery. This is, let's see, I want to find a reminder. So I'm in my feed, I'm looking for reminders. I want to find something that may have been triggered by my deadline. I can filter it down that way. There's not a ton of recent activity here. But when you get feed reminders for those deadline chain items, you can always add to the conversation. And that's where you could use that tasking feature. Maybe we activated that discovery deadline chain. You could go into that reminder and task another user saying, hey, can you request Word versions of these? Or can you send a copy of this to our co-counsel? You can do that in the feed, in the project, just directly under that notification. So it does also kind of give you more of that interactive tool instead of just having the reminder pop up as is. But just throwing that one out there. It's not something I see done very often, but if there is a case where you do have a deadline chain item that you need someone to act on, you can always click into the reminder and add to the conversation where you can then task someone by typing the @ symbol, not a W, or mention them, which will just put it on their feed, not their task list, by typing the plus and the @ symbol and then their username. Jasmine, anything else you can think to mention about our deadline chains and task flow?
No, I think you did a great job. I know that you went over kind of that replacement list. That could be super useful. Again, like you saw, she added the chain date in. Some of those items are just helpful to know so folks aren't having to go in and try to find that information for themselves. So would recommend kind of utilizing that. If you all are like, hey, we need help or additional support on building out deadline chains, task flows, anything within Filevine, we do offer support services. So we have hourly support that we just started rolling out. So if you're a firm that's like, we don't need a full block, we work on a block system here at Vine Skills. So if you're like, we don't need, a full month's worth of work, maybe we just need a few hours here and there. We do offer that support. You'll see on Amanda's screen here, we do have those 3 different options with plans starting as low as $225 a month. If you're like, hey, we have someone new that we're trying to bring in and train, and we want a 50-minute training session, we get kind of those done here in our hourly support as well. If you are in Filevine and you're like, hey, we've been in Filevine for a while, I'm sure that there's areas that we could probably improve on or we're not utilizing to the fullest of our ability, we do also offer a free Filevine audit to kind of go through and say, hey, you have 15 phases in you and your staff are only using 3 of them. Let's come up with a game plan. Let's, clean up your Filevine, whatever that looks like. We do also offer those. On our page, I'll go ahead and drop in the links to both of those items in the chat. So that way, if you all do want to partake or even just read a little bit further about either of those services, you do have the option to do that. And then as our standard offerings, we do offer any ongoing Filevine support. If you've added on a new Filevine product like Lead Docket, Document Assembly, or FVDA, Periscope, anything like that, we also kind of run the gamut on all things Filevine. So if you need help getting onboarded with any of those services, feel free to reach out to us. I'll also put Amanda's email as well as my own in the chat for you. That way, if you do have questions afterwards, you can feel free to reach out if you have questions or want to get connected with any of kind of the services that we've talked about. We can get you pointed in the right direction. And then as always, we do offer free help every Wednesday, this same time. We record these sessions so that you all have an opportunity to either watch them back if you need, or if you're not able to make it, you can at least get the content afterwards. And we do at least list out the next couple of topics because they do change. AMA is Ask Me Anything. You all can hop in with any questions that you all have had. We are going to be doing an FVDA session. So lots of opportunities to kind of get content. And we do, again, have a full library of these videos, as well as some other videos from like our QuickBooks Connect team, Lead Docket team, so on and so forth, all listed there on our website. Any of the links that I've sent can direct you right to those pages. Perfect. Amanda, anything else that I missed?
No, I think that covers it.
Let me go ahead. Sorry, I'm trying to type your email and mine in the chat before we kind of hop off here. Perfect. If you all need anything, again, feel free to reach out. If not, thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully you learned something, and thanks so much, Amanda.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.